We begin with the one thing that has consistently haunted the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president. Something that has time and again kneecapped Donald J. Trump in a way that his political adversaries, even the legal system itself, has struggled to do. We're talking, of course, about Donald Trump's own words. And today, we are reminded that words do, in fact, matter, particularly when they are uttered during a deposition under oath and as part of the $370 million civil fraud suit brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, a case that threatens to deal a so-called corporate death penalty to the Trump Organization itself. As viewers of this show know well, that trial has not been short on fireworks between Trump grandstanding outside court or grandstanding inside the court. Time and again, Trump has turned this trial into a cross between a MAGA rally and a WWE wrestling match. Whether he's sparring with the judge or delivering last week's blistering 6-minute soliloquy in open court on the final day of proceedings. This is not the first time Donald Trump has been deposed in this case. Trump's first deposition was more notable for what he did not say, invoking the Fifth Amendment nearly 450 times, answering one question, only one: what is your name? But if he stonewalled Letitia James and her investigators last time, that is not what we see here. Just listen.
My most valuable asset, I didn't even include on your statement, and that's the brand. I didn't even include that. The brand, if I wanted to create a statement that was high, I would have put the brand on. If you look, I mean, I became president because of the brand. Okay? I became president. I think it's the hottest brand in the world. I think my brand value is probably my greatest asset, even though it gets tarnished by people like this suing me. Maybe it gets hotter.
Donald Trump tipping his hand as to why this case, more than almost any other, and he has a lot of cases to choose from, has gotten under his skin so badly. Why this case seems to be keeping him up at night. That's because it's a lethal threat to his brand, a brand that, as you just heard him say on the record, under oath, he believes got him elected. A truth bomb that is both poignant and potentially legally very powerful. And that's where we start today with New York Times investigative reporter Sue Craig, plus former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy, is here, and Democratic strategist and director of the public policy program at Hunter College, Basil Smikle. Sue, I want to ask you about Donald Trump, as we just heard, talking about how his brand helped him get elected. Why is that important here?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, and you said something, I think, off the top, I think he has become a lethal threat to his brand. And I think it's really important to talk about his brand, because when you think about his brand, for years it was a consumer brand, and it was very valuable. I've seen a lot of studies, you know, if the Trump name went on a building, it would increase, you know, the price of the building. And I just think his view is stuck in a really different time, because he is no longer a consumer brand that appeals to high net worth. The hotels are really nice. And that's how it was always measured. And experts say now, when you think of the Trump brand, it is a political brand. That's not to say that there is not worth in it. But once you go down that route, you've got detractors, and it becomes just something else. And it was really interesting, just in some reporting that I've been doing, I talked to somebody recently who got a call from the Trump team saying, would you testify in this civil case for us? And they wanted to have this individual talk about the consumer brand and the value of it. And the person declined because they are no longer tracking it as a consumer brand. So I would argue for Donald Trump to talk about his brand now, there should be a reset about exactly what it's worth. It's not to say that it doesn't have value, but it is worth a lot less when he was a hot commodity coming out of the Apprentice years in 2004, 5, 6, and 7.
Right. There's the question of what it's worth. And then I think there's the even bigger question that you just framed, which is this question of what is the brand itself? Is it a consumer brand? Right. Is it a political brand? He does not seem to have come to the reality that there has also been a price to pay in the evolution. Tim, last time Trump was deposed, he took the fifth nearly 450 times. This time you hear him talking. You're a former federal prosecutor. What is the legal strategy here?
Hard to tell, Alicia. The legal strategy was probably the wise legal strategy was the first one he chose, which is to assert a Fifth Amendment privilege. It generally does not go well for charged criminal defendants to talk openly in response to questions about some of the things that overlap with those criminal charges. So I think, as always, this is more of a public relations strategy than a legal one. I'm really struck, thinking back to January 6th, about his description of brand. A brand is a commercial product. And we spent on the committee a lot of time developing the fundraising apparatus and how so much of the sort of stop the steal narrative was motivated by a desire to cash in, to make money on it. He acted as a business person more than the president of the United States by raising money on the big lie. He continues to raise money on the big lie, and surprisingly, it continues to work. So I think it transparently demonstrates core motivation, at least a large part of it, is greed and grift.
Right, because he himself is conflating the brand. Sue, I want to play just a little more from Donald Trump's deposition. Take a listen.
So you were too busy for the company?
In a way,
Object
yeah.
to the form.
Yeah, I think you could say it. It's another way of saying it. I was very busy. I considered this the most important job in the world, saving millions of lives. I think you would have had nuclear holocaust if I didn't deal with North Korea. I think you would have had a nuclear war if I weren't elected. And I think you might have a nuclear war now, if you want to know the truth.
So is it too cynical, or is it giving Trump too much credit to say that perhaps one of the reasons he did answer questions in this deposition, didn't invoke the Fifth, is because he understood that this is tantamount to what he's been doing outside of a court? As Tim just said, not a legal strategy, a political strategy.
I don't know. I see it that he realized the risk of taking the Fifth, and that could be used against him. I mean, I could who knows really what was in his mind, but that would be my guess as to why that happened. I'm open to sort of debate on that, though.
Then let me ask you a question, Sue, that you definitely can answer, which is that we've heard Trump, his legal team, argue that this is a victimless crime, that the banks recouped their money. He talks about that in this deposition. He said, quote, "The banks are shocked by this case. Do you know the banks were fully paid? Do you know the banks made a lot of money?" Sue, your response?
Well, that sort of reminds me, it's sort of a piece of, well, everybody does it, and everybody does it just seems to me to be an admission. It doesn't make it legal. This case has been, when I think about it, it's been difficult in terms of, I think, some people to process it, because the victims, in quotation marks, were the banks, and they got paid in full. But there's a larger thing at play to me here, and that's that he submitted false business records to financial institutions in the state of New York to get better rates. And that's a crime. And I think that when you look at it, they don't need to be a victim. I understand why some people have their hard time getting their head around it, but I still think you can't really get around that. And I think that is a serious, crime in itself, what he did.
Basil, Sue just referenced those financial statements. I want to read you this from what he said. He never felt these financial statements would be taken very seriously. He added that the only reason he even had them prepared was for himself, quote, "just to see the list of properties." Quote, "I think more for myself than anything else." Nobody does that, Basil, right? I mean, clearly there is a lot of ego motivating what it is he's saying.
No, that's absolutely right. And, it's interesting because remember when he ran in 2016, people used to be so upset at the things he said and did. And folks would say, don't take him seriously. None of it really matters. And clearly he felt that about his own business dealings. None of this really matters. And it really does go back to this point about branding, because the interesting thing about a brand is that it's two things. It's a psychological construct. First and foremost, it depends on the person or entity trying to deliver that brand that they develop a psychology around that brand. Think about everything he does and says to and in support of his followers. He remains consistent and he repeats things over and over again, which is sort of the other part, the consistency and repetition. Everything that existed, whether it was Trump, the real estate magnate, Trump, the apprentice host, or Trump, the presidential candidate, it's all about creating this brand where none of what I say actually matters as long as it feeds and allows me to burnish this brand. And so you can't ever take him seriously. You can't think about his policy positions as at all stable. God bless Tish James for being able to suss a lot of this out. And sadly, go back to 2016 when Hillary Clinton was actually saying the same thing, that all of what he pretends to be is just a lot of fluff. Sadly, we didn't take it as seriously as we should, perhaps, at the time, but he is actually making that plain for us right here and now.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I got to put up this calendar. It's worth remembering we're in the legal bumper cars portion of the program. Next week, the E. Jean Carroll defamation case wraps up. The judge in this case has said he'll rule by the end of the month. A ruling from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals on the question of presidential immunity could come at any moment. We truly feel like we are just waiting for that to descend. Early next month, the Supreme Court's going to begin hearing arguments in the 14th Amendment case. You have a ruling from a federal appeals court on presidential immunity could come at any time. The confluence of all these trials, Tim, does it help or does it hurt defendant Trump?
Look, I think he thinks it helps him, Alicia. That's why you're seeing the sort of rhetoric from the campaign trail coalesce with the rhetoric in this deposition in the courtroom in the civil case the other day and his statements outside of court. He is running as an enemy of the system, of the deep state, which includes the judiciary and these politically motivated prosecutions. So his defense in these cases very much dovetails with his argument as a candidate. I think that may work in a press conference. It just doesn't work when it comes to evidence, jurors, the application of facts to law. It is a very risky strategy when you are charged with very, very serious criminal offenses and the jurors will be evaluating the evidence presented in court. That is the risky strategy. I suppose there's a sense that maybe he will win and make these cases go away. But when you, in fact, pursue a political strategy in a courtroom, really, really dangerous.